Okay, today on the bench I had a planet robot brought in for repair. Now this isn't one of the Chinese repros that you can buy now. This one is one of the vintage ones. It was made in Japan, and let's see, who is it? Yoshita Japan. It had one of the longest builds of almost any of the robot toys. There are versions of it dating all the way from 1956 clear up into the 1970's, and they just kept changing things. Like some of the earlier ones were battery operated, some of them had rubber hands, some of them had hard plastic hands, some of them had the metal hands like this, and then by the 1970's they had the hard plastic hands, and the head dome was plastic as well. But one we have here was sent to me because they said the left foot rear roller wheel had become unpinned. It was loose up inside there. And on the bottoms of these particular feet on this one, you see there's 3 tabs, and you can in fact carefully, even with your fingernails so you don't scratch anything. This toy had been worked on before, it was obvious. Straighten those and lift this foot shell. Now the foot shell can only lift so much because it's attached to this leg shell. These are non-load bearing, the shell and the leg. But this will come up and hit in here, so you can only lift it so much. But you can lift it just enough that if you have the legs separated like this, 1 foot forward, 1 back, you can get in with needle nose and you can push that pin back in the wheel. Now the problem is that in this particular toy, the pin is short, and when the toy was originally built, the pin would grab into the rubber wheel. In other words, it was forced in, held there. And most toys, they'll cut that metal axle, the thing I'm calling a pin's an axle, long enough so that when this shell comes down, it can't move. So you figure 70 some odd years ago when this toy was made, that pin fit nice and tight in that rubber wheel, and it didn't come out. Well, since then, of course, the rubber has gotten hard and you change its shape and everything, and the pin was loose. So even though I could put it back, it was going to fall back out again. But I did put it in place and tested it, because that's where the ratchet is, and the ratchet wasn't working. So even if I put it back in, the robot wasn't going to walk. It was going to do the curly shuffle and just stand there and with its feet moving but not going anywhere. So as long as the wheel was loose, I took it out and then very carefully, using a triangular file, cleaned every one of those little grooves on it until when I put it back together, I could feel that it did work. It will roll back and locks forward, roll back, lock forward. So that was good. Then all I had to do was secure, since the tire spun free on the axle now, I could glue the pin on both sides the axle so it couldn't move, put the foot back together, and was going to call it good. But there were a few more things that kind of bothered me about everything. One, it had the lazy ear. Because of the way these are made, this vertical one is almost always flopped forward or back or something, especially if kids have had this, and kids have had this. So I went ahead and secured that. You can see up in there with a little bit of E6000, which is a rubbery glue to hold that vertical. And since I had that off, I went ahead and checked since it wasn't sparking, and the flint was worn out. So I've replaced the flint. Now you can't use flints made for lighters, because flints made for lighters are a very hard flint and they won't spark. So this is a flint from an actual sparking toy. Every now and then when I see wind-up sparking toys, I know they'll have flints in them cheap, I'll buy a bunch of them just so I can tear them apart to get to the flints. But the reason someone had been in this toy before became obvious when I did that, and they did the right repair. They did the only thing you can do. You see that groove worn in that brass gear right there? Well, this whole wheel used to be flipped around the other way because the gear that drives this is over on this side now. So someone opened it up, bent the frame apart, flipped the sparking wheel, which is actually the speed control for the robot too, flipped it around because it had so much use that it was completely worn out. The teeth were gone. That's a legitimate repair. That's good. But the one thing that they didn't do is this wheel with those that rubs on the flint. If I can get close enough for you to see, it actually has a forward and backward direction. In other words, the rough edges on that, just like in a lighter, are sawtoothed. So when you flip that around, all of a sudden they were aiming the wrong way. They weren't going to chip into the flint to cause the sparks. So I had to pull that part back out again. You have to very carefully build up a press setup so you don't damage the pins and the axles. Press that off, then press it back on again, flipped around the other way, put it back in this way. So we're back together again. In case you've never seen the insides of one of these, that's what we're looking at. Now, even though this appears to be leaning forward an awful lot, I'm hoping once the body and the head are on there, it'll stand straighter. But none of the linkages are bent, so it is leaning factory. There isn't any, normally you'll see some damage bent here, or when you sight down in there, you'll see one of these bent. Something that would cause, you know, the robot to lean. But this doesn't appear to be leaning in any direction. Let's wind this up a little bit here. You got your on-off switch here. I already saw one spark there. So you can see how this mechanism works. The crank moves, and then that moves the legs. The gears are worn enough where it does hang up every now and then. It's actually sparking quite a bit. I think the gears that turn really quick, so your wind up, your spring turns really slow. Then as they progressively go up, they go faster and faster, and that's what works as a speed control. For example, if you take that flint wheel out altogether, it'll just you know, it'll just run full speed till it's done. Okay, so had to be real careful. I didn't want any of those little 4 tabs break off that are there because they've been worked on before. And I don't know that I can do this on camera. I thought I would just give it a shot, and if it doesn't work out, then I'll simply not show it going back together. But I thought it was worth a try here. We've got a lot of things that have to line up, and I don't want to bend the tabs to make it easier to line them up, because the tabs might be, you know, they might have already had their last bend. They might not like one more bend. You just never know about these things. Yeah, I think so far so good. Oh, the flint wheel. That darn flint wheel. Alright, let's get that down. Trying to get the neck in position. Everything's going. This pin is getting ready to drop in. Okay, now what I'd have to do is I'd have to come back and bend these. See, they have to fold all the way over and back. We'll save that for off camera in case something horrible happens. Lord knows we don't want to see something like that. Hey, it's sparking and walking. So there you have it. A very vintage Planet robot in working condition.